Okay, Selma, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. I'm really happy that we finally had a chance to do this.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, I thank you so much. So, while I read your bio and introduced you, it's always nice to hear it from you. So, start from the beginning of, whatever that might be. How, of course, very curious how you got into health and nutrition and doing what you do now. But tell us a little bit about your background and your journey that brought you to your profession and what you do today.
So I'm obviously born in UK. I studied at a university in UK. I studied dietetics. I always had an interest in health and well-being from a very young age. You look your family members around you; they suffer from a lot of long-term conditions like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and you really want to understand what you can do more for them. And then my interest really grew around eat healthy eating, wanting to do more for the community. So. I've been part of the NHS system for the last 25 years as a pediatric and adult diabetes specialist dietitian. But from there, my interest grew in doing more so for the community and developing more educational resources. So I have been very, very privileged and lucky to work with a number of organizations, both national, international, and local organizations developing lots of resources. So, for the last 10 years, I have been involved with the Carbs and Cows, Ethnic World Food Book, and now I have an interest in developing health resources for children. So, it's been a long journey, but it's one that I've always had an interest in, and it seems to just grow every day. There's always an interest from a different community. And my passion is really to educate people in something which is more holistic, more culturally sensitive, and it's also very close to the local community, which is more likely to be accepted than the old school way of doing things, a one-to-one clinic, medical-based setting. And that's really where my journey started.
Nice. So your very first, like, it's always interesting to hear after you graduated, finished school, what was your very first professional job in this area?
So it's funny, when I graduated, it was summer of a very long time ago,
You don't have to say the year. It's okay.
a long
I
time
know.
ago.
Yeah.
And I got a call from a local hospital that there is a job. And my university had informed us that there is a hospital, and I had just phoned them that I've just graduated. And within a month, I had a job as a dietitian, which was very surprising because I wasn't hoping to work immediately after studying for 4 years. And my very first job was in a sort of a tertiary hospital, a local tertiary hospital, where it's surprising because majority of the community and the individuals that were coming there were from the South Asian background, and I just hit it off very quickly because I'm very lucky to I'm able to speak multiple South Asian languages, including Urdu, Hindi, Punjabi, Kashmiri. All they're very similar dialects, but people just open and warm up to you very quickly when they know that you can understand their dialect, their languages, you understand the foods that they eat, and the communication just became very easy for me with the patients that I was seeing. And I quickly developed group education for these clients because obviously their need was very, very big here. So I was working as a diabetes dietitian in a local tertiary hospital with majority of the patients that I was seeing were from the South Asian community. And from there on, my interest in developing health education and resources and literature just grew and grew and grew.
I love that also that you're able to speak many different languages because I think we talked a little bit about this before. Food is such a important part of culture. It is a language in and of itself, but it's something that's very near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. If you're talking about nutrition in a second, third language, it can feel very mechanical and not personable. So I'm sure that people really appreciated that. And outside of, I'll get into the, different foods and different work that you do around that. But Did you find anything different when you're working across different nationalities? Like I discovered as an American about myself after leaving the US that food was just about quantity over quality. Did you find any nuances among different cultures and versus the UK about how they perceive food or relationships with food, other than it being a part of a culture and celebration and things like this? But anything else that surprised you about food?
I think we've got to recognize that we cannot assume everybody eats the same. And literature, and if you look at a lot of the resources that are created, it's very much people assume that everybody eats the same. If we look at the balance of good health, eat well plate, um, there's no representation for communities, and we often forget that food it's embedded in people's culture, like you just mentioned. It's embedded in people's religion, their beliefs, and we have to recognize that any conversation around food has to be very sensitive and very personalized. And what I realized very quickly that people are very much connected to the food that they eat, and they want to basically be recognized by their cultural diets. So it's really important that we don't label everybody as eating the same. So, for example, if you just take the South Asian community, people will assume that all South Asians pretty much eat the same. But if you just look at India as a country, there are so many different regions, different type of cultures, foods, celebrations, and we have to recognize these, and we cannot generalize that everybody eats the same. And I realized that very quickly in my career. And that was something that really made me stand out to other dietitians, that I was able to educate people based on their cultural needs, their beliefs, their preferences, and just as simple as, South Asians, you have people who eat, a normal diet. There are people who eat vegetarian diets, people who eat vegan diets, there are Jain diets. And you have to differentiate as a dietitian. This is a quality that we have, that we recognize people's cultural differences, and we can then embed that into the dietary advice that we give. So that was something that I realized very, very quickly. And also, that food is, a part of people's life, how they live, how they cook, so if we think about people, how they eat in congregation, if you go to their places of worship, there are many places where offer food as a daily staple diet, and knowing how people connect with this sort of congregation is really useful. So having that knowledge was really, really useful for me. And then I was able to apply that in my day-to-day conversations in clinic. But apart from that, it's really important that you don't stereotype people because of type 2 diabetes. They might be eating a certain type of diet. There are the multifactorial, we know now from years of research that it's not just the food. There are multiple factors that impact people's health outcomes, but food being one of them can have a huge positive impact if we know how to change it the right way. We can make a great impact in people's lives.
Yeah, true. True. I love that. And even not even the food. Well, as you were talking, it got me thinking about even how we set the table in different countries makes a big difference. I've seen a lot of Western brands of kitchen supplies, furniture, whatever it is, but around the kitchen. And yeah, it's great if you like to cook and have access to certain things. But I'm not sure that they're all doing so well anymore because it is missing the point when you can't just like bring American kitchen into a South Asian kitchen and say, here it is, this is what you're going to use. But they don't maybe need the same things. It's not set up the same way. You don't move through the kitchen in the same way. So it is very, very cultural and very specific. And even within different regions, different countries, within different families, there can be even different traditions and other things. So I think that's really wonderful. And then how did you then get to the point where with carbs and cows. Tell me a little bit about that. I think some listeners might be familiar with it. I know a lot of educators recommend it. It's people are aware of it, but I think you can do it just as much better than I can.
So there's a funny story behind it. When I was just come out from my finishing my education, and I was see my first job was in a very diverse community. I immediately recognized that there is a gap in resources, and I was missing something in what I could offer people who were coming into my clinic, and I didn't have anything that was culturally specific or relevant to people's cultural needs. And I emailed Chris, I'm sure if he listens, I emailed him and I said, do you have anything for South Asian communities that you can forward to me or share with me? And it would be great if you could just update your Carbs and Cows books with more South Asian foods in there. Because there is a gap. There are certain foods in there, but there is a whole list I can share with you that people eat. And he wrote back to me and saying, we'd love to do something like this, but we just don't have the capacity and the resources at the time to do something. And 10 years down the line, I reached out to Diabetes UK and I said, there is a need. 10 years on, nothing had come out. And they said they're, pushing for nationally developing more resources because, as you know, in the NHS, people are eligible for free education. And I was really hoping that we would get something through the National Health Service. And Diabetes UK then came forward and said, we'd like to do this project with you. And would you be happy to lead on the project, developing resources for South Asian communities, but we would also incorporate other communities as well. And I wrote back to Carbs and Cows and I said, I've got this opportunity. Would you like to collaborate with me? And they were very happy. So we came together. My kitchen was transformed into a studio for 1 year.
Oh, wow.
My husband and the children had to eat the foods that were photo shooting every day. So we worked with them on a very strong collaboration. So we cooked the foods, we had to weigh them, we had to know exactly the nutritional values because these foods were not in the databases like we have now, AI. But at the time, we didn't have a database of cultural foods, so we had to know exactly what was in the ingredients to know the nutritional values. And we did it very old school way. So we then tailored for South Asian, African, Caribbean, and also the Arabic community because that was the need locally. And we came together with over 1,000 images of foods that we had prepared.
Wow.
And this was an addition to their existing resources. So that's how it all came about. So it was a strong collaboration between Diabetes UK, myself, and Carbs and Cows, and another colleague of mine, Dr. Joan St. John, who led on this with us. And we then came together with a World Food Book, which was one of the greatest milestones, I would say, in my career, because that really opened a lot of doors for me, for other healthcare professionals, and also for many providers that were wanting to offer address inequalities in their services. So from there onwards, we then started to see a lot of discussions and sort of work that was continued to do in terms of improving health inequalities in the UK, because we know that diabetes remains one of the prominent conditions in these communities, and we needed to do more for them. And that's really how the my whole career journey took off then from there. And since then, the book has now been transferred into the app, and all the images are now available in the app. So those of you who are familiar with it, Carbs and Cows has a series of books with the cultural books. There is obviously, we still get a lot of calls from many communities, including Chinese, Turkish, even people from Malaysia reaching out to us to do more work. But if anybody is interested, they can reach out to Carbs and Cows, and I'd be more than happy to support you in this journey.
Amazing. Yeah, I'll help you with Turkish food. I lived there for 8 years. I'm an all right cook.
Fantastic. Brilliant. We can come over to Dubai and do it.
I enjoy the eating and photography more, but I know a few people that might be interested in that. And for sure it is needed and yeah, you get used to guessing, but when you're just starting out and everything is so overwhelming and having that information is priceless because you need to dose insulin against it and understand how it's working in your body, what it's doing for you. So incredible. And then Ethnic World Food Book, is that also an app or is that organization?
So that all comes under the umbrella of Carbs and Cows book.
Okay.
So the World Food Book was initially a book, but now it's transformed into the Carbs and Cows app. So it's under the app, the Carbs and Cows copyright app as well. So you can download the app, and all the foods are available on there
Amazing.
and is
And is it,
available globally now.
oh wow. And is it in different languages as well? Like,
So that's something that's not a feature on their app at the moment. It has been requested by multiple people around the globe saying if we could translate it. But obviously, this sort of work is has to be done through Carbs and Cows, but it's not available. But I have a feeling that they are looking into developing something with other countries.
for sure. Amazing. Amazing. So, having said that, and we're talking about different foods and different cultures, but again, with all the influence of the West and everything else, there are so many different ways to eat. And when it comes to health and diabetes, and people often associate that with lifestyle and weight loss, I'm sure you often get asked, what is the best diet or the best way to eat?
It's a very typical question, and I often get asked, how do you what diet do you follow? So this is something that has been with me for all my life, my career, studying dietetics and then working in dietetics, and you're always under pressure of ensuring that you know what is the right diet if it's evidence-based. So I've had to make sure that I'm up to date with every single diet that is trialed and tested, and I've gone through a number of research sort of cycles of which is the next best diet in the management of diabetes. But if we just take a step back and think about what diabetes is and how people live with diabetes, it's not a sort of a temporary fix. It's not a short-term fix that a diet is going to fix their diabetes, whether it's type 1 or type 2 diabetes. It's really something that people have to live with, and you have to support them with something which is more sustainable. And whenever I see patients, I see people in clinic or in group education, I always say to them, there is no one diet that fits everybody, whether it's you're going to be thinking about a low carbohydrate diet, or whether you're thinking about a very low calorie diet, or whether you're thinking about intermittent fasting, or whether you're thinking about the reversal of type 2 diabetes. It has to be individualized. Now, this takes a lot of effort and time for the individual and healthcare professional to come up with something more sustainable. Whatever you're going to do, it has to revolve around your family, your children, your lifestyle, your work. It cannot be something which is not going to be sustainable, because if intermittent fasting is not going to work for your family, it's not sustainable. And the short-term fix is not going to improve your long-term condition. So the best advice I can give you is if you don't want to do any diets, if you don't want to follow all the advice that a dietitian is saying, just think about eating smaller portions. Whatever you eat, enjoy your lifestyle. Enjoy if you're living around people, there's food all around, always around you. You really struggle to not understand what you can and cannot eat. Just thinking about portion control is one of the best ways you can manage your diabetes. And that's what I always teach people about. We might be eating a little bit too much for what we need, what we used to need, as we are not as active or not as mobile or not as, if you go back 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago when people were more active, there were less facilities around us. Now everything is so easy. We're not as active as we used to be. So the intake needs to be much less. So just explaining people in terms of what their requirement is can help them. And also, if you can just give them simple solutions that they can change every day, is more likely to be effective, rather than giving them 1 week or 2 week diet plans, which they're highly unlikely going to stick to for the rest of their life. So education has to be really awareness of carbohydrate, understanding of how much carbohydrates, proteins, fats they're eating, And then managing it according to their actual lifestyle and their energy requirements is the most simple way of managing a long-term condition, whether it's diabetes, whether it's heart disease, cardiovascular diseases. It all comes down to, how much you're eating.
I'm so glad that you said that, that it's individual and always, of course, people are, wanting to manage it and always do their best. But I see everything from in newly diagnosed children. Someone once asked me, "Do you offer food plans?" And I said, "Well, that, as you pointed out, that's not sustainable. You don't want to order a food plan for your child the rest of their life. So that, you need to learn how to count carbohydrates and teach them about healthy foods and making healthy choices." And it's very hard because it seems like that would be easy, but in the end, that is difficult, and that is doing a big disservice to the person with diabetes and everyone else. And then when they're not able to participate in something because they, don't understand how the food works in their body, it's so tricky. You mentioned portion control. What is a portion? Like, I think I know what a portion is, and there's probably a lot out there in social media that people see about portions. What is a portion?
So it's a really good question. What my portion is might not be the same as your portion, Pam, or might not be the same as portion for somebody who is growing up. It really is based on, we go by guidelines. So everybody has set guidelines. Now, we don't expect everybody to know what their requirements are. So in terms of what their carbohydrate requirements are, their protein requirements are. Then, as a dietitian, we break things down to make it more simplified and more visually more appealing to an individual rather than. So, if I was to give a plan for a healthy individual, a healthy person living with type 2 diabetes, a plan based on 2,000 calories and said that 50% of your intake should come from carbohydrate, it'll just go over their head. What does that mean? What does that 50% look like? And if I said to them, you've got to have 130 grams of carbohydrate if you want to manage your diabetes. So these are just numbers. Often people get so overwhelmed with numbers, or you need to have 1.2 grams per kilogram per body weight for protein, or you need to have 30 grams of fiber. And as clinicians, we often forget this language is not an easy language for a layperson to understand. So as a dietitian, I've always believed to simplify things. I've always, felt the need to really simplify portions. So if you're asking me portions of carbohydrate, as we're talking diabetes here, the simplest thing I say to people is that, you need to split your carbohydrates fairly evenly throughout the day, 3 meals a day. And often people say, well, I don't have breakfast. And I said, just visually try to break it up. So if you've got 150 grams recommendation for carbohydrates per day, and you're having, let's say 3 meals a day, you want to break your 3 meals by 50 grams per meal. And then what is 50 grams? What does that look like? So what I would just show them is that, a fist size is about 30 grams carbohydrate. A slice of bread is 20 grams of carbohydrate. So you have to give people examples of what they look like. Like two egg-sized potatoes is sort of 30 grams, or a scoop of cooked rice is 30 grams of carbohydrate. Sorry, a cup size. And, using household measures helps people. So generally, to summarize your question, what is a portion? Handheld portions are very easy to explain people what they mean. And then with protein, we have simple measurements that we say, 2 to 3 portions of protein per day. That could be a matchbox size or a fist size of whether you're having a chicken or fish, your palm size protein, 2 or 3 of them a day. And then if you're having dairy, we say 2 to 3 portions. So what is 2 to 3 portions of dairy? So we give people real life examples of household measurements to help them understand how much they should be having per day. Generally, we all have very similar requirements based on our sort of age and our generally the requirements are based on age, but then they will vary depending on your physical activity. So once you've understood your requirements, then you can ask your healthcare professionals to just simplify things for you in terms of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats as well. Because we often forget there are good fats and there are fats that we don't need, because we generalize things as fats are all bad for us, but actually we do need some really good fats in our body as well. So if you can just, the message I would give to anybody listening is simplify carbohydrate portions with everyday practical foods that will really help people then understand how much they should be eating. And then the guide is, to stick to 2 to 3 portions per meal, and you're going to have much better control. Now, I'm just going to give you a typical example of what I see in my clinic is an average person eating a South Asian meal. They might have some rice and some chapatis and a potato curry, and they might be consuming their whole day's carbohydrate requirement in one day, in one meal. So how do I go about changing that portion control for them? So I'll just say to them, think about increasing your protein so that you don't need so much carbohydrate. Increase your vegetables. So you use a portion plate, and that's something that's always been very close to my heart. So if you've got a plate, you put a line in between, and then your top portion is your vegetables. So half the plate is vegetables and salads. And then you've got the bottom portion, which can be cut into two. So you've got a quarter of the plate, which is protein, and a quarter of the plate, which is carbohydrate. And that starts to help people sort of understand how much what their portion plate should be looking like. Now, that's really for weight management, carbohydrate management. And then sometimes people like to have a bit more carbohydrate, then it will be really thinking about the better type of carbohydrates to have. So when you're educating people, there are 2, 3 things that you can do. Is the simpler way is to help them look at their plate model, and then also look at the type of carbohydrates they're eating. Because if they change their type of carbohydrate to a high fiber carbohydrate, they're less likely to have more refined carbohydrates and feel full much more quickly. So there's simple things that people can do at meal times to help them reduce the portion, improve awareness of portion control, of carbohydrate awareness, and also replace carbohydrate foods with more protein and vegetables as well.
Nice. When you say better carbohydrate and more fiber, can you give us some examples of what your favorite, better, best carbohydrates are?
Yeah, I can do. So my favorites happen to be sweet potato. Love sweet potato. And often people say, well, how do you cook that? Chop them up, put them in the air fryer a little while. Sweet potato, seeded bread, things like sourdough bread, whole wheat pasta, also things like beans, pulses have a little bit more fiber if you add it into your carbohydrate. And then chapati flour, what type of chapati flour or flatbread flour or naan bread you should be eating is more of the whole grain. If you don't have a whole grain, just add in some seeds, add in some nuts. And my other favorites are things like quinoa. Some of you might be very familiar with these foods. Some of you might not be. Bulgur wheat. I mean, these are foods that have been around for a very long time, but were not as, eaten in the Western diet when the Western diet came into place. But now we're seeing things like bulgur wheat, quinoa, things like couscous, coming back more into, you'll see them in salad bars, you'll see them in supermarkets. It's very, very common. And these are more high fiber carbohydrates. Even if you have a smaller amount, you feel much more full, you feel like you've eaten quite a lot, and you don't need to consume them in such large quantities. And the other thing is, sort of adding more things like seeds and nuts to your carbohydrate can also increase the sort of reduce the slow absorption of the carbohydrate. So the key is moving away from the traditional carbohydrates like white bread, white rice, white pasta, white pita, white bagels, and replacing it with more sort of seeded whole grain, and then having more of the different type of grains and beans, barleys, wheats, which one have much more health benefits and also have a lower release of carbohydrate peak, which means that when you eat them, you feel full much quickly because the release of carbohydrate is much more slowly, and also they break down slower than the refined carbohydrates. Sweet potato, things like cassava, yam, they have much lower GIs as well compared to white potatoes. Basmati rice generally has a lower GI, but the consumption of rice is much larger. So some people ask me, is brown rice better than white rice? So in terms of the carbohydrate content, it's exactly the same. But in terms of the fiber content, so brown rice would have much more fiber in comparison to white rice. So these small swaps can make a quite significant difference to how we eat, and then bringing in more things like seeds, grains, pulses, beans has become more popular in people's diets now. Often people say, "Well, I don't know how to cook chickpeas. What do I do with lentils or kidney beans? I don't like them." It's a point blank sort of like, I don't like these things. Your children, if you ask them to eat kidney beans, they won't know what to do with it. But if you add them into salads or if you add them into things like pasta, you can mix it into bulgur wheat, into couscous. You can really bulk up carbohydrate with more beans, lentils, more high fiber sort of grains, and that can have a significant impact on how we eat. And that I see that a lot more happening now. You see the trends on
Mhm.
social media. More and more people are eating these type of foods, which we call wholesome, whole wheat, whole grain foods, and we're coming more to sort of natural foods rather than processed foods. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about that. But we're seeing a trend in people understanding what real foods are and coming back into our diets as well.
So, and then when you mentioned the different flours in like chapati, I was picking my son up from somewhere and I never realized in this little shopping center there is a South Asian supermarket and they're advertising all their flours. I'm like, I need to go in here and learn about them all and practice cooking with some of them. But they were advertising diabetic flour. And I don't remember if that was for chapati or something else, but what exactly is that?
So I do see that this diabetic flour, people have asked me about it and whether there is such a thing. And I think people have got to remember that it is still carbohydrate, whether it's added more whole meal flour in there or if they've added. So there is some sort of thought process in the South Asian community that there are certain types of flour which is better for type 2 diabetes. So that's known as I've forgotten the English name to it, but the Asian name is things like jowar and gundam, and also there's different types of attas which are much more tougher, and the grain is sort of much more sort of complex compared to the refined chapati flours. And the flour is basically still has carbohydrate. It's not carbohydrate free, but it is more complex, which means that they were more likely to eat one of the complex carbohydrate flour compared to the refined carbohydrate, which we can eat quite a lot of. Um, and that's the difference. But you've got to remember that all the flours will have carbohydrate. There is a difference in the amount of carbohydrates in them. So there is no such thing as a diabetic flour. There are different types of flour which might impact your blood glucose. So it might be worth you trying out these different flours and seeing how it impacts your blood glucose on your sensors and tell me whether it's actually made a difference. Because with my people with type 2s, they don't have the liberty of having sensors, so they won't
Right.
necessarily know whether it's made a benefit or not.
Yeah, my son has been my lab, and now he's older. He's not as entertaining me as much about the foods I make. But he's like, if you make good vegan food or vegetarian food, I'll do it. So we did it for a week, and his blood sugar was beautiful, like really amazing, and it was nutrient dense and just enough carbs, but I didn't do anything over the top. And, I think it was a school holiday that, we all had a little more time and not running around as much. So I was able to cook some really amazing food. Um, but then, of course, when his endocrinologist looked at his numbers, she's like, "You're not feeding him enough. Like his carbs were low." I said, "But we were experimenting. It was more vegan and nutrient dense and different things like that." So it does make a difference. But again, not everyone will have always the same results either. There's so many other factors that affect blood
So
sugar.
many, so
So
many.
yeah, we can't say that 100% it works, but it was fun to experiment and at least he's open to trying new foods. But so that's good. And earlier you mentioned portion control, which I think was a good segue into your latest project. Why don't you tell us about that? Because it's absolutely fabulous, and we're really excited to support you as you're
Thank you.
doing
Thank
that.
you. So I'm really excited as well. So, as you know, I've been a dietitian for a very long time, and I always find that people with type 2 diabetes, they always have um, this analogy that if somebody had told me earlier, I could have done more. If somebody had
Mm,
given me better advice when I was 20 years younger, I always get asked, if only somebody had educated me better when I was younger, I would have made a difference. But there is a lot of evidence and research coming out that early intervention, early nutrition will have an impact on your risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And when I say early, we're talking the first 1,100 days of life is what has shown to improve your sort of risks of developing long-term conditions. And more sort of public health teams are doing more to do education at early years, and we're talking as women are getting pregnant. So fetal nutrition, sort of postnatal nutrition, is crucial in how we now develop, and giving the child that early education is going to have a huge impact on their outcomes. So I have been thinking about developing some resources and come up with quite a few new resources that are going to help children, families be more interested in health in a more fun, and not make healthy eating boring, not make it sort of, monotonous. So I wanted to be more of a lifestyle and a culture shift in communities. So thinking of like, healthy eating should be everywhere around us, not just in schools and not just the doctor telling us, but it should be in supermarkets, it should be in malls, it should be in, at the gyms, it should be at nurseries, it should be at schools. So it should be sort of like a part of our life rather than just one-off education session at
mhm,
school, or just one-off, I'm going to the doctor and the doctor's telling me to lose weight or eat healthy. And that's not the way we should be shifting this society. And I really wanted to make a big impact in how people perceive healthy eating. So I came up with lots of ideas with my children, and we came up with designs of designing plates and toothbrushes and cups and everyday sort of tools that children use that will have simple messages and make them feel like it's really important to know these things from a young age. So, as we're learning, as we're growing, we don't have to make healthy eating, it should be part of our journey. And then I came up with the simple plate ideas. So I've designed quite a few plates here, so for vegetarian, vegan, sort of people who eat meat. So it's a simple plate which basically shows you portions of carbohydrate in the form of grains. We talked a lot about better type of carbohydrates, and it gives you some simple images of grains, vegetables, the importance of protein from a young age, because often you'll find that children eat very plain diets. They don't like mixing things. They don't like vegetables. They don't like peas. And that could be because we don't introduce it early enough, or we're worried about the fear of rejecting foods. And we follow trends like, children should be eating nuggets or pizzas. And I want to change that analogy, that is not the type of foods we should be giving to our children. And children should be given good food like adults eat, rather than
mhm,
processed foods which we don't even know what's in them. And just simple tools at home that can help. I mean, you probably have seen similar plates in the market, and you're probably thinking, so what's so different about these? But we've come up with a song, portions that would represent the guidelines for children, and also the importance of having these foods at every meal time. So fruit can be eaten with the meal, improving your dental caries, your dental health as well. Protein is just as important, and also having the grains, carbohydrates, which are more high fiber, so seeded, making it more visually appealing to children. And if your child is looking at this every day, it's more likely to be a behavior change. And that was really the idea behind this. And what we've done is now we've grown as a community interest group, and my aim is to develop more resources. So the plates then went on to toothbrushes. We have a huge problem with children not brushing their teeth. We know the sugar consumption is very high, and the dental carie and the tooth extraction rates are extortionate. And this is something that can be prevented. And I'm not just talking as a healthcare professional, but as a mother. I feel if I can educate my child because of the knowledge I have, every other mother should have that knowledge as well. And then lastly, my concern and my aim to reduce the use of bottle feeding. We see children on a bottle for a very long time, and we see the delayed speeches. We see issues with communication, and often we find that children are consuming bottle milk and they're not getting the nutrition that they should be because a lot of the nutrient is just coming from the liquid. Many mums might assume that they need lots of milk per day, but actually, milk is nourishing, but it's not as nourishing as a lot of other foods that they can be consuming. Vegetables, fruits, protein, pulses, beans. And we're really afraid to give children these foods because we are surrounded by messages about burgers and chips and French fries and drinks, and we think that is normal. When we've created an obesity, pandemic around us. So the whole ethos behind my project was to change attitudes of parents. So I go into a lot of early years centers, libraries, schools, just educating children. Without giving people leaflets and too much information, I give out free plates, toothbrushes, cups, with any grant funding I can get, and try to get people to become more interested in health and well-being rather than enforcing it onto them. And that's really where the project started. And I'm really pleased that, we've had some interest from the Middle East, from UAE, from China, people in Pakistan, because people need practical resources. They need to move away from paper written information and they need things that they're going to use every day. So that was really where I wanted to take this because, I feel like I've done a lot for adults in my last 20 years. And for the next 20 years, I'd really like to do more for children, changing attitudes and behaviors of children from a young age so that as they grow, it's normal for them to eat vegetables. It's normal for them to eat fruits, and it's not, something which I've never seen or never eaten, and it's just a beige diet that I'm familiar with. So that's really where my whole passion has stemmed
Yeah.
from.
No, I love that. Yeah, and it's quite sad what food has become, especially for children's food. For those that are listening in their car or somewhere on the podcast, and we'll put pictures and links in the show notes, but someone's developed a plate and it's sectioned and divided by portion with fruit, vegetables, and grains and protein so that it helps you and your child understand what a healthy portion is and what should be on your plate. And yeah, children's menus. My son was not aware they existed until he was like 4 or 5. We were out with friends and they're like, we have the kids menu. He's like, there's a kids menu? What? Because he always, we always ate good, healthy food, and not because he was diabetic since 18 months old, because that is what a normal and any child should eat, whether, and Aaron will always say, like I say it all the time, like diabetic or not, nobody needs to have donuts every day. Nobody needs ultra processed foods. It is here, it exists. We need to know how to navigate it, but we don't need to be eating it every day. And it's so sad. I think I've even heard somebody, and I'm not sure who, refer to what has happened to children's food as like a form of kind of child abuse because we're just feeding them garbage, which I hate to sound so kind of crass about it, but that's not the professional way to say it, but there is not any nutrients in ultra processed diet and lifestyle.
And I
And
think, Pam, it's so true. I think we're just afraid of introducing foods to children. And, what we know from evidence and research is that children who are introduced earlier have better outcomes, better teeth, better development, better speech, and also connection with food. We see a lot of fuss eaters in clinics. We see a lot of children with deficiencies, with early onset of type 2 diabetes was never heard in my 20 years of career. early onset of children as young as 8 years old, which is alarming. And a lot of you listening might think, well, diabetes is everywhere and everyone. But if we think about an 8-year-old getting diabetes and then the impact it will have on their pill burden, their medication burden from such a young age, and this is something which we can easily reverse through better diet, better food, connection with food. And that can only happen if we give people the right tools, the resources, the confidence of knowledge of education from a young age. And particularly from the diverse communities, low income communities. We see in the UK a lot of, you'd be surprised, food poverty. People rely on burgers and chips because it's very, very,
Cheap.
very cheap.
Yes.
And things like whole grain pulses, nuts, seeds are expensive. But as an educator, we can still promote healthy eating, eating less, eating the right food, and avoiding certain, like you said, donuts,
I mean, I hate to
donuts.
call out donuts. Sorry, all donut companies.
Fortunately,
Yes.
healthy eating is not as sensational as we would like it to be. However, saying that, we are seeing lots and lots of doctors, dietitians, nurses now becoming a little bit more on YouTube, making it a bit more snazzy, making it a bit more interesting for young people to follow. My son likes making his own breakfast now. Before it was just cereals, but now it's luckily avocados, omelets, scrambled eggs, poached eggs. There's a war going on who cooks better eggs in the house. So it's great. And I encourage every young person who comes to my clinic, can you cook? What can you cook? And they'll say, cook? I don't know how to cook. I'm like, well, I don't know what you should know how to cook because that's how children develop an interest. And really encourage parents listening, get your children cooking from a young age so that they know about flavors and ingredients and recipes and so they're not relying on noodles or pasta or pizza and just blindly eating things on autopilot. So the more we get children involved from a young age through the plates, through the recipes, through the newsletters that I send out, the better for children to be more engaged with their health, healthy eating, recipes, the better outcomes they'll have in the long term and relationship with food because we know children rely on one type of food. And that is because we are afraid. Until we don't get them involved, things will not change.
Yes. Yeah. And letting them select and it's addictive. It's designed to be addictive. And then they just want more. I actually had an idea the other day when I saw nearby in my neighborhood, there's this kind of exercise gym center with all of these wonderful things around sports. But right in front of it is a whole row of fast food, ultra processed, and more is coming. And then there's a school just down the road. And I actually, when I was again picking my son up, there's not a lot of food choices around in that neighborhood. And so there's two schools beside each other. The kids that are older after school will walk and go, grab a burger or whatever the fast food. And I'm not saying all hamburgers are bad. And we mentioned Dubai chocolate earlier. Proper Dubai chocolate is not bad. It's all the ultra processed things that they're trying to make like a Dubai chocolate. That's not the real thing. But I thought, I had two kind of ideas in my head. One, I was like, well, at least they walked because kids aren't moving enough. But there should not be fast food in a certain mile or kilometer radius of a school. I think that would be a start, but it's everywhere. It just feels like it's everywhere. And then when you want a healthy choice, they're all very kind of similar or pretending to be healthy choices, and then sometimes created by people that don't have backgrounds. And it's hard. Food is hard, nutrition is hard. There's a lot to
Absolutely.
think about.
Absolutely.
And then when
Yeah.
it comes down to also making money, I once went to a children's center to try to convince them to put a healthy product in their
Lunchbox.
kind of no, their canteen. Okay, this is an after school kind of place. Kids were going to play basketball. There were all kinds of different activities there. And the guy was really honest with me. He said, I had bananas, I had all these things. People weren't buying them. They go bad. I'm just throwing them in the trash. He's like, this chocolate bar that I can buy for a very small amount and I sell it for this much and then I make money, I have to stay in business. And it's nobody's fault. We're not here to blame. A lot of people will blame the parents when we talk about kids with type 2 diabetes. Yes, as parents, we need to help our children navigate it and guide it. But if we don't have that background in education, how can we do that? So it's a bigger systematic problem.
Absolutely. I mean, this is sort of a national public health um, dilemma at the moment, how they're going to fix this problem. But we're not here to solve that. We're
Yeah,
just here
no, we're
to
not here to
get
solve it.
children. We
Yeah.
can't get away from fast food giants, and we know that things are just going to grow bigger and bigger. But what we can do is get children more interested and involved in food and awareness of the amazing foods we have around us, the amazing ingredients we have, and just have that sense of texture, smell, and understanding of flavors and recipes and ingredients, and just knowing what the different type of vegetables smell or look like. Some people will not be able to differentiate between different types of vegetables because they've never had the opportunity to try them. And if you are offering children at an earlier age, they're not going to say no because they don't know any better. But if you're delaying it and starting to give them vegetables when they're 4, then they are going to make those fussy choices. So it's just really encouraging parents that they can have those healthy eating discussions with a 1-year-old. It is absolutely fine to do that. And they can introduce things like, tomatoes, cucumbers, carrots, avocados, peppers to a baby who is weaning, and not to be afraid of you know, and have those conversations with their healthcare professions, and not be pressurized by supermarket trends of processed foods or pouches or ready-made baby food, which the babies don't need.
Mhm.
So, if we can stick to our roots and our originality of giving children cultural foods, again, many parents come to me and say, well, they don't eat our cultural foods, that it's because we've introduced it too late. And the sooner we bring these foods into children's diets, get them involved, interested in food, cooking, smells, textures, the easier it will become for the parent and for the child as well.
So true. I think we could talk about food for days.
We can, we
I know we can, especially when it comes to children and everything and nutrition. But I think that's a really good note to pause on. I don't want to say stop, to pause. If you are interested in the healthy food plates, I'm excited to say that we do have them in the Diapoint shop. You can get them, and you should get them for your children. It's such a wonderful tool, and they're made with bamboo, all natural, not plastic. So you don't have to worry about all that icky stuff that goes into a lot of the other things that you see. Thank you, Selma, for everything that you do. You truly made so much impact in such a short time, really, although you've been working in as a dietitian in food and nutrition for a really long time, but your work has been so meaningful and it's really just so lovely. And I know that you help so many people and you're going to help so many more.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And I'm really happy to be here today and talk about my passion, share my passion with you. And I hope that we can continue our discussions in the near future. And yes, I'm really excited about getting the plates out to families, to children, schools, nurseries, wherever you can think that we can make an impact. It would be great to have our resources there.
No, it'll be there. It'll be there. This is only part one. We'll do another part two and we'll dive deeper. I have many other food questions that we didn't even get to today, but we'll save that for part two.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.